Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us this evening. We are excited to be here as we talk about clearing the air, navigating COVID-19, tobacco cessation, and vaping realities. I'm Dr. Rasheeda Monroe. I'm a pediatrician and health equity educator at WakeMed and UNC School of Medicine, and I will be your moderator this evening. Before we start discussing tobacco, we want to share some updates about COVID-19. We're continuing to see the impacts of COVID-19, and we know that symptoms of long COVID can go well beyond a lingering cough after you get infected. It can impact our breathing in the long term, but also our body and different organ systems. Today, we want to highlight some of the impacts on your health. Over the years since the COVID pandemic began, we've learned that keeping up with COVID-19 vaccinations can significantly reduce the risk of long COVID. Studies suggest that just one dose of a COVID vaccine can reduce your risk of long COVID by 21%. 2 doses reduce your risk by 59%, and 3 doses can reduce your risk of long COVID by 73%. And while the vaccine is no longer free, there are organizations and programs like the Bridge Access Program that can cover the full cost of the vaccine if you are uninsured or unable to afford it. You can visit www.vaccines.gov. You can enter your zip code and find locations where you can receive the COVID vaccine, and the website will also show you the locations that accept the Bridge Access Program, making it easier for everyone to get vaccinated. Now, on to our one of our topics for tonight, one that impacts our community and our well-being, and that's tobacco use. Tobacco use stands as the leading cause of preventable death and illness in the United States, surpassing the combined toll of AIDS, alcohol, car accidents, illegal drugs, murders, and suicide each year. According to the CDC, in 2020, 19% of Black adults in the U.S. currently used any tobacco products. Black adults usually start smoking later in life as compared to white adults, but are more likely to die from smoking-related diseases such as heart disease and diabetes. Black adults who smoke are more likely to use menthol cigarettes than people of other ethnicities. And in 2019, 16% of Black adults who smoke in North Carolina, of those, more than 80% used menthol cigarettes. We'll learn more about why that's important later. But menthol cigarettes are aggressively marketed to certain populations by the tobacco industry. And we know that if menthol cigarettes were no longer available, an estimated 36,000 additional adults would quit smoking, including 16,000 Black adults in North Carolina. As we're talking about this, it's really important that we acknowledge the historical context, as Black people have been harmed by unjust practices related to the sale of commercial tobacco for centuries. Tobacco companies have long employed predatory marketing practices to Black neighborhoods and communities. To increase the sale of tobacco, they have had price promotions such as discounts and multi-pack coupons in neighborhoods that have higher concentrations of Black residents. These companies have also supported historically Black colleges and universities by donating money and endearing themselves and attracting themselves to the Black community. It highlights the importance of addressing not only the individual behaviors around tobacco, but the systemic factors that contribute to tobacco-related disparities in our communities. It's imperative and it's an equity issue. Lastly, since the emergence of e-cigarettes, more specifically vape products like Juul, youth tobacco use has significantly increased. E-cigarettes continue to be the most used tobacco products by youth. Over the past 10 years, e-cigarette use among North Carolina high school students increased tenfold. In 2022, it was estimated that over 43,000 high school students in North Carolina used e-cigarettes. And this pattern is normalizing smoking and priming the developing adolescent brain for potentially lifelong addiction. I'm particularly excited to hear from our panelists about this, as I'm a pediatrician and mother to 2 teenage boys, and so this trend, of course, is particularly alarming. I'm excited to introduce our panelists. I am joined today by Dr. Stefanie Etienne, Medical Director and Family Physician with WellCare of North Carolina. Dr. Etienne, do you want to just give a quick introduction about yourself and what you're excited to talk about tonight?
Thank you, Dr. Monroe. Like Dr. Monroe mentioned, I'm a family physician. I practiced here actually in Wake Forest for 14 years. I was here until September of 2022 at the health department. I've been very involved in the community, particularly in the COVID pandemic. I work with Dr. Monroe in Southeast Raleigh community to help vaccinate underserved populations. I'm very excited to talk about COVID as well as the impact of the pandemic and flu and RSV as well.
Thank you, Dr. Etienne. You're right, we've worked together for some number of years now alongside each other. Thank you. I'm also joined today by Bolu Abe-Lathan. She is a physician associate with the Duke Smoking and Tobacco Cessation Program. Bolu, will you please introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bolu Abe-Lathan. I am a physician assistant with the Duke Smoking and Tobacco Cessation Program, as she mentioned. And I service, or program services all over North Carolina. We're even reaching out to Virginia and South Carolina as well. And we've really gone virtual, so to make it easier for patients to be able to access our services, which has been tremendous, especially through the pandemic.
Thank you so much. We're excited to have you here and to learn from you tonight. My last panelist is Nnenne Asi. She is the Tobacco Prevention Youth Director with NCDHHS. Thank you so much for being with us. Nnenne, will you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your area of interest?
Of course. My name is Nnenne Asi, and like Dr. Monroe said, I'm the Youth and Young, it's a mouthful, Youth and Young Adult Tobacco Treatment Coordinator with the Tobacco Prevention Control Branch. And a little bit about my job is training health providers and other people that have contact with students, learn more about tobacco treatment for youth and young adults. And especially as e-cigarettes are becoming more popular, that's an area of interest that I've kind of just picked up. So I'm excited to speak alongside my colleagues as well as educating you all.
Thank you so much. We're excited to have you here. Before we get started, I will quickly say a thank you to Mayor Vivian Jones, the mayor of Wake Forest. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. So to those in the room, we appreciate you being here. You will have the opportunity to ask questions from our panelists. But let's get started with some questions. We'll start with some COVID-19 questions. Dr. Etienne, here we are, primary care physicians during respiratory season. I was in clinic today and saw lots of snot and cough and fever. We're still seeing RSV and flu and COVID. Can you remind us where we are, not just in the pandemic, but in this respiratory season with COVID and flu, and what people should be doing to help protect themselves and their families?
As you all know, we are officially out of the pandemic, thank goodness. However, COVID is unfortunately here to stay. So we're still seeing quite a bit of COVID as well as flu. We're pretty much in the peak of flu season as well. We're still seeing quite a bit of RSV as well. And all three of these conditions can affect people of all ages. So it's very important that we take precautions to prevent the spread of these illnesses. One simple thing that can be done is to make sure you frequently wash your hands. You know, with the pandemic, we kind of gotten used to that, using hand sanitizer and washing our hands. We should kind of continue with those practices. We should also, especially if you're going to be in a large group, you may want to consider wearing your mask. Wearing mask. If you're sick, stay home, because you don't know what you have and what you may spread to others. You would like other people to afford that same courtesy to you. So be mindful that there are people who may have weakened immune systems who, if they get sick, it can be potentially life-threatening. So really don't let your guard up, and keep those same practices that we adopted during the pandemic, and just pretty much do that forever now, unfortunately.
And especially during the peak of the season, of course, we're washing our hands and staying home when we're sick, and covering coughs and sneezes or illnesses, especially masking when it's necessary. But what about vaccines? Something new happened this year as far as protection from RSV. We've had COVID-19 vaccines. The recommendation continues to be stay up to date with the most recent COVID-19 booster. So if you haven't gotten the booster that came out in the fall of 2023, then you should get your most up-to-date booster. But remind us about vaccines for COVID, flu, RSV.
Okay. So starting with COVID, the good thing now with COVID, even if you have not been vaccinated yet, those of us who were vaccinated earlier in the pandemic, we had to get multiple vaccines as a part of a series, as well as boosters. Now, people who are vaccinated or unvaccinated, the only thing that you need to do now is get the most updated booster. And most people will only require one per year. If you're someone who is older or has a weakened immune system or certain chronic medical problems, you may need an additional shot. So you won't have to start and get a series of 5 shots. So don't let that scare you away. If you're new to getting COVID vaccines, it's only one and done for most people. And also with the flu vaccine is given, of course, every year. You should get it every year. It's usually available starting in about September and through about April. So even if you haven't gotten it yet, it's still time to get it. We still see the flu as late as April, sometimes May, believe it or not. So if you haven't gotten the vaccine, please get it. And there are also vaccines available for RSV. Most people won't need a vaccine for RSV, but if you are an older individual, 60 or older, and if you have more high-risk medical conditions, it is a good idea to get the RSV vaccine. There are 2 types of vaccines that are available, and they're readily available from your doctor or even pharmacies. So there's very easy access to all of these vaccines.
Excellent. Thank you so much for reminding us of that and how we can stay protected. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about tobacco and tobacco cessation. Bolu, I'm going to start with you. When we talk about, and we mentioned this a little bit kind of in the background, when we talk about menthol and menthol being targeted to the Black community over the years, tell us why that's important. What's the impact of menthol in cigarettes?
That's a really good question. And a lot of people really don't know the history of menthol. Actually, menthol was not originally a quote-unquote Black cigarette. It wasn't the Newport that everybody is so familiar with, and that we've kind of seen lots of advertisements, especially in magazines and on billboards and stuff. And it actually started to become targeted to the Black community because of like our culture and how we live. It was really targeted to be a clean cigarette. Everybody likes to be clean and fresh and things of that nature. And so it kind of just started to spur, it caught on. And of course, with anything that's catchy with these businesses, they're going to exploit that. And so it's just been a really big exploitation for decades. And the fight against menthol has been going on for decades. And the reason why that is so important is because of what menthol does to the body, what it does for the smoker. And a lot of times it's the entry cigarette per se. And I hate to say that because I don't want anybody to be smoking, but a lot of youth, so not just Black youth, but all youth. And if you can think back to any family or friends when they started smoking, they may have started smoking with menthol. And there's several reasons for that, because menthol is not just a flavor. A lot of people think that that's just what it is. It's just like a minty taste that's kind of refreshing. But really what menthol does to the smoker and what it does to tobacco is that it makes it highly addictive. So it increases that nicotine addictive quality. It also makes it easier to smoke. So a lot of people don't feel that kind of harsh heat or burning when they start smoking. A cigarette burns at about 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you've ever want to experiment what that is, open up your oven, turn it on, and that's about how high or how intense that heat can be. And that's going down, through your throat, through your lungs. So you can imagine if menthol is cooling that down, it's going to be a lot easier and more enjoyable to smoke that. The other thing about menthol is that it's not regulated in tobacco. It's regulated everywhere else. It's regulated in the medical field with cough syrups and cough drops and those things. But in tobacco, it's not. And a lot of people think, oh, if it doesn't say menthol, there's no menthol in my cigarette. Unfortunately, that's a lie. Over 90% of tobacco sold here in the United States has some percentage of menthol. So even though you think you may not smoke a menthol cigarette, you smoke a menthol cigarette. So, yeah. So that's why it's really important that we really get menthol banned. People really actually understand what menthol does to your body, what it does to your mind. And so it's really important.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I learned a lot just then that I did not know. It's wild that we would continue to allow a product to be sold that makes it easier for one of the most addictive substances that we have, tobacco, to make it more addictive and easier to get down. When we know, like we talked about in the background information, that tobacco is one of the most related to preventable causes of death, more than when we combine HIV and car accidents and suicides and murders all combined. That is just wild. And so this ban of menthol should take effect. And so over the next years, we should be seeing that menthol is not in any cigarettes anymore.
Yes, but if you know anything about the tobacco industry, they are tricksters. Yeah. They will do anything that they can to continue the profit margins that they have. And tobacco has a lot of money. You'd be surprised at how far-reaching tobacco money is, because it's not obviously advertised of where they put it. As Dr. Monroe said earlier in her introduction, they touch colleges, they touch concerts. It goes very far, and they're sneaky in that because they want, unfortunately in this country, capital is king. And so with that, don't be surprised if you start seeing a non-menthol cigarette. And that's because now, with our technology and things that we have these days, they can develop a menthol-like flavor or synthetic product that mimics traditional or natural menthol leaves. And so that probably will start being out there. I wouldn't be surprised in some places it is. Some states have actually already banned menthol. California was one of them. I think it's still kind of in jurisdiction with making it final. Massachusetts, Boston, up in that area, they've also banned menthol. There's other cities and small counties and districts that have banned it. And it's just really important. And it's unfortunate that it's taken this long, and so many people have been affected by menthol.
Thank you so much. You know, as we're thinking about the introductory cigarette, right? Menthol being a lot of people's introduction because it's easier to get down. Let's talk about vaping, especially as we're thinking about in our youth. And, you know, as a pediatrician, you know, the number of children that I see who have been introduced to vaping and think like this is, you know, a better way or a safer way to smoke. Nnenne, I'm gonna ask you. Tell us about vaping and what are the harms and risks. Is it safe cigarette smoking?
Thank you for that question. So that's what the tobacco companies want us to think, that electronic cigarettes are the safer option, but safer doesn't mean healthier and safer doesn't mean better. So while they don't contain the same sort of chemicals that combustible cigarettes do, they still contain really harmful chemicals that damage your lungs permanently. And the issue with this is that it's unregulated. Since they're newer, I mean, I think it's around like 2011 where we started to see e-cigarettes. They're unregulated, and so that they're selling them in, you know, gas stations, and anyone can go get them. So in North Carolina alone, we can kind of just see, oh, excuse me, let me speak into the mic. In North Carolina alone, we'll see from data, youth and young adults are getting vapes from parents, from siblings, from school friends, and also online because it's unregulated. There's no one to say, hey, show me your ID. You can just go get a whole bunch and resell them at school. So to answer your question, no, they are not safer. While it's an alternative, it does not make it healthier for any type of use.
You know, there is something about vaping, right? We don't know all the reasons why, but there's something about vaping that has caused lung injuries that we've never seen before, right? So you said that it can cause permanent lung damage. We've seen in the children's hospital children who have vaped a time or a few who had lung injuries so severe they needed lung transplants. And that's hard for kids to really understand, right? Because it looks cute and it's fruity flavored and it's pink, which looks so cute and benign. But imagine causing so much damage to your lungs that you need a new set of lungs at the age of 17. And it's so hard to get people to really kind of understand because they see, you're right, they can get it anywhere. And if it were that dangerous, then why can you go to your grocery store and pick up a pack of gum and a Juul? How do we help counsel people about this? Like, how do you talk to your youth about this?
Thank you. It's really about education and family support. So while I say education and family support, it's really parents getting educated as well to know and spot the signs of nicotine dependence in your children. And while it's scary at first, not feeling like you have to come and attack your youth, just coming to them with open arms and saying, yeah, I know. This might seem trendy, it might seem cool to vape, but this is permanently damaging your whole entire body. And also being open to getting them help. So a few of the cessation techniques that you could use is NRT, which is nicotine replacement therapy. And that includes inhalers, nicotine gum, nicotine lozenges, I can't say that word, but it's like a cough drop, and then a nicotine patch. And that's more for adults 18 plus, but for youth, there's so many cessation programs. So in North Carolina, there's a program called This Is Quitting. There's also a program called Quit the Hit, and there's also a program called Live Vape Free. And these are text programs. Live Vape Free and This Is Quitting is a text program that you can actually text into, and although it's about a month and a half, a support coach will be texting you just to get you to quit smoking. And Quit the Hit is an Instagram program. So you'll be in a cohort style with other people your age, and it is incentivized. So that really does encourage you to quit.
Wow, that's awesome. Cessation programs have really changed over the past decade, really keeping up with the trends. So using social media and text and group therapy or kind of group connection for teens and adolescents, that's brilliant. I love that. Thank you for sharing. As we're talking about tobacco cessation, Bolu, can you talk a little bit in your experience? Do tobacco users want to quit, and how do you recommend they go about starting that?
Yeah, it's another good question. From what I've seen, a lot of people do really want to quit. The issue is that they don't know how to quit, and they don't know where to start because it's an overwhelming task. I primarily see a lot of adults in the age range of about 50 plus who've been smoking for about 30, maybe 40 years. Especially living here in the tobacco state of North Carolina. And so they're just kind of like, they've maybe had several attempts at trying to quit and weren't successful. And so they kind of get discouraged. And of course, every time they go into their doctor and their doctor's like, hey, you really need to quit. And, they kind of feel talked to and not talked with. And so our program really tries to meet the patient where they are, to really help them find a path. We don't have like a lot of times people feel like, oh, this is kind of like the set path of how I should quit. Like I should have a quit date. I should do this. I should do that. I should flush my cigarettes or throw them out in the trash. I should do that. But when they come to our program, they realize, wait a minute, this is different. This is different than what I've heard my doctors tell me. This seems kind of unconventional. And that's because everybody is not the same smoker. People have the reasons for smoking, and they also have the reasons for quitting. And so my job as a cessation counselor or coach, I really try to dig those things, kind of think those things through, find those things that are important, and address those. Because sometimes it's not just about tobacco. Sometimes it's about other things that are going on in people's lives, other situations that they have going on, feeling maybe isolated, especially if their family are, big smokers, and now they're going to be the only one who's not smoking, kind of being left out there. So, honestly, the biggest thing anybody could do is come and get help. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the first step. And then the second step is just keep trying.
I like how you ended with keep trying, because it usually takes people multiple attempts, and the next attempt may be the one that works, right? But keep trying. I love that.
I would say it takes on average maybe 5 to 7 attempts at really quitting to like stay quit. And then I think what people underestimate is that once you kind of have that sense, like that taste or that feeling of smoking, sometimes it doesn't leave you, and you have to figure out how to address that long term, especially as people are starting to live a lot longer than what, we have in the past. And so sometimes you'll have that, and just having plans and really developing coping mechanisms and skills that can be a lifelong skill, not just for tobacco, but other things as well, is really important.
Thank you. I want to make sure that our audience members have an opportunity to ask any questions. I see that we have someone and coming up with a microphone. Please introduce yourself, and nope, don't introduce yourself. I see. If anyone in the audience, please raise your hand and we will bring you the microphone. Please introduce yourself and ask any question that you have about respiratory viruses, respiratory season, smoking cessation, tobacco, vaping. We have a question over here. Thank you.
Getting back to the viruses, huh? Oh, I'm Barbara Jones, about the oldest person in here, I guess. But anyway, what is the difference in between the COVID, the flu, and the RSV? I never had either one, thank God, but I'd like to know. I mean, if I have COVID, or what is RSV? That's a new one.
Thank you so much for that question. And you are the wisest and most senior person in the room. Don't look around. She says, am I the oldest person in the room? Dr. Etienne, I'm going to open this up to you. So the question is, what is the difference between COVID, flu, and RSV? And is RSV the new one? You know, we've seen RSV for quite some time. This is just the first time we've had a widely available protection against RSV. But help us know the difference between those viruses. What type of symptoms do they cause?
That was a very good question. We're currently seeing all three of those conditions in full effect this season. So, of course, they are all caused by different viruses, but some of the symptoms can be pretty similar. With COVID, in most cases, you're going to have a fever. You may have body aches, and that's similar to the flu. So it may be hard for you to tell, do I have COVID or the flu? But with the flu, it's more likely to have higher fevers and aches. With COVID, we've seen a wide range of symptoms. You may have a stomach ache and diarrhea and have COVID. You may just have a cough. You may just have a sore throat. And with so many people being vaccinated now, we're seeing that people don't have as severe symptoms. So you may just have mild cold symptoms. So the important thing is to get checked, especially if you're older and you're at high risk for complications. Get tested. The only way you'll know 100% what you have is by testing to rule in or rule out certain conditions. There are tests available for COVID, flu, and RSV. And if you are at risk for complications, you really want to know the difference because there are treatments available for both flu and COVID. And if, in certain cases, if you have severe symptoms, RSV. So you may not know what you have. Well, I will say with the flu, a lot of people, like, as a doctor, I work in the urgent care. I can go in a room and I can spot a flu a mile away because they are plastered. They have fever, they're weak, they're achy, they're sweaty in most cases. You can kind of tell when someone has the flu. But like I said, with COVID, you can have so many different symptoms. And as far as RSV, most people, most older children and healthier younger adults, they may just have mild cold symptoms. You may just have a cough, runny nose, sneezy, and it may just seem like a cold. And you may have RSV. And then you don't necessarily have to know if you have to be tested in those situations.
So generally, they all can be viral colds, right? Cough, runny nose, sore throat, fever. And for people who are either very young and at risk or older or with health conditions that put you at risk, any of the three of them can be more dangerous. And so if you're having cold symptoms with fever and you're at risk, then you should see your physician and get tested. But there also are vaccines available for certain populations for RSV. The very young and the very old, there's vaccines, or I shouldn't say very old, over 60, there's vaccines available. And then for COVID and flu, if you're over 6 months old, there's a vaccine available. So what do we say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Excellent question. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions in the audience? I see a hand up right here.
Hi, my name is Dale, and I had a question as far as vaping. I know that the teenagers get hooked on the nicotine part of it, but let's say you use it for medicinal purposes, which has an agent in it like THC. Does it still have the harmful chemicals behind it as regular vaping?
That's an excellent question, Dale. Thank you so much for asking that. Could you hear that question well? Nnenne, go ahead and answer that for us.
Thank you for that question. It's a really good question. So, yes, it's the chemicals that are in the e-fluid that make them harmful. So, just for an example, one thing that's found in one thing that's commonly found in e-fluids is vitamin E, vitamin E. And while vitamin E is okay to put on your skin, it's not okay to inhale. So that's amongst the things that just cause, damage to your lungs. And no matter what you're vaping, it's generally not okay to inhale anything other than air. So just generally. That's a really good question. Thank you.
I like that generalization. Just air for the most part. Thank you for sharing that. But thank you for reminding us vitamin E. I feel like that's what we've heard is probably the cause of a lot of the really toxic injuries to lungs where people are needing like transplants after, vaping for the first or second time, right? So no matter what you're vaping, whether it's THC or tobacco, the vehicle that gets it into your lungs is very toxic.
Exactly. And the last thing I wanted to add is it could seem safe because, like I said, vitamin E is FDA approved, but for topical. That's why it's FDA approved, not for ingesting it. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much tonight. Thank you. Are there any other questions in the audience? I see a question over here.
Hi, my name is Shayla, and I have a question about vaping as well. I know when e-cigarettes were originally introduced, they were introduced as like a safer option to assist with quitting tobacco. And with vaping, I think a lot of people think that the vapor is that vaping is called vaping because it is vapor, like water vapor. Is it water vapor? And if it isn't water vapor, what is it?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Shayla. It is not water vapor. That is a common assumption that it's safe. I'm just vaping water. No, you are not. You're vaping a lot of stuff. So generally, it's the mode of, e-liquid is vitamin E, but there's a lot of different chemicals in it. So I can't pronounce it, but diacetyl, I think it's called, is it's very common in e-fluid, and that causes irreversible lung damage as well. There's also different herbicides, so things that kill weeds out in your plants, common in e-fluid. So yes, to answer your question, it is not water vapor.
Herbicides. Okay. All right, so just air, you said. Okay, just stick to air.
And I mean, it's also dangerous to inhale water, just to give you something else to compare that to. If you inhale water, you could get sick, so just air.
Just air, all right. That's going to be my theme for some time, just air. How did vaping get the reputation? Why did people think this was a safer way or this is safe smoking? I mean, certainly clinicians and experts didn't label it that way. Was that another marketing ploy of the tobacco companies?
Yes, exactly. So the tobacco industry, while they're bad, they are smart. And they have to replace the older generation of smokers because they're either getting all sick or dying or quitting. So they needed to come up with something that seemed safer and healthier. And when you think about it, if you don't see nasty smelling smoke blowing up in the air, you're like, oh, this is good. You smell fruity stuff, you're like, yeah, healthy, great, it smells great. That's generally what it is. So the tobacco industry is targeting youth, and they're trying to replace older smokers in general. So all that is, it's a marketing ploy to target younger people to smoke.
So tonight we learned that we put menthol in cigarettes to make it easier to get the addictive chemicals down, and that we target children with their underdeveloped brains and try to get them addicted so that we can have a new generation of people addicted to tobacco. That's terrifying. And when you think, Dr. Etienne, about tobacco smoking being related to every cancer, not just lung cancer, it increases your risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer and colon cancer, every cancers. And that we're, with tobacco companies, are working hard to get a new generation addicted. It's really terrifying. I saw a question, I think there was one here, and I think, was there one on this side too? Hey, let's start here where we have the microphone, then I'll come back to you, okay?
Yvonne Thomas. We all know the harmful effects secondhand smoke causes. Does being in close proximity of someone vaping cause those very same harmful effects?
That's a fantastic question. I'm not sure if you could hear that well. Does being in close proximity to someone who's vaping have the same side effects of being in close proximity to like secondhand smoke?
That is a great question. So while it's not the same exact effects, you are inhaling nicotine. So there is research being done on secondhand vaping and secondhand vaping, but you are still being affected by the nicotine that someone else is blowing out as well.
Thank you. And we have another question over here.
Yes, I just wanted to know more effects of nicotine on the teen brain. I don't think we've really touched on that, and I felt like that was the topic. So if we could talk more about that and the effects of nicotine and anxiety, the correlation with that, if you don't mind.
Excellent, thank you. Who wants to take that? Bolu, do you want to start with that?
I can take a slight stab at that. As far as nicotine and the teen brain, so nicotine, I guess to really talk about nicotine, you have to understand what it is first. And nicotine is kind of like a stimulant. It really helps the body to release neurotransmitters like dopamine that make you feel good, that kind of make you feel relaxed and feel wonderful. And so when you think about the teen brain and how it develops, and the teen brain technically isn't fully developed to about, 25? So that's a long time. A lot of times we think teenage, they stop at 18 because, they're ready to go off to college. But that's not true. That frontal cortex, I believe, is still hardworking and developing there. And so when you think about when people start smoking that young and you think about things that they've been through, it just alters their perceptions about things, especially stress in particular. A lot of times people will start smoking out of stress reaction. And so when you think about somebody who's always handled stressful situations, especially as a teenager growing up, and then when they get older as an adult, what do you think they're going to reach for? A cigarette. Because that's what they've been that's what they've been using most of their life to handle their stress. And you think about anxiety, which is a form of stress. A lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to smoke because I'm so stressed out. I'm just feeling anxious. And what we find is that it actually increases the anxiety. It does not take it away. I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but cigarettes have not cured anything in the history of medicine. They have not, despite what old medical textbooks may have started off telling you. They haven't cured anything. And it actually makes depression, it makes those symptoms even worse, especially because you're artificially making your body release dopamine. And so that can lead to like imbalances and things of that nature. Great question.
Nnenne, did you have anything to add with that?
You did a great job, especially with teens. So I think the way that I like to think about nicotine dependence and nicotine dependent cessation with teens is trying to find that source of stress and replacing it with a healthier coping strategy. So a lot of the time teens will be like, oh my gosh, school is so hard, I'm gonna vape. And you can hide vapes in the bathroom, they don't smell bad. And that's how they form that dependence. So getting involved with sports, doing more doing more after school activities, that's a way to encourage kind of replacing that nicotine dependence as well. And while you can do both, nicotine dependence will prohibit you from really fully participating in sports and fully participating in after school activities as well. So it kind of just really encourages the youth to really examine that this is something that I'm dependent on. I don't want to do this anymore. It kind of prohibits me from being the best person I can be. And that, attached with support and behavioral strategies from counselors, could really help your teen quit.
Thank you. That was an excellent question, and thank you both for those responses. As a pediatrician and mom, I think a lot about teens' anxiety, mood disorders, substance use disorders. And again, when we think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, I'm always counseling families from very, very early the importance of a few things. One, adequate sleep. Adequate sleep, adequate sleep, adequate sleep. Not getting enough sleep is associated with anxiety disorders and poor learning and mood and improper growth, whether that's overgrowing, obesity, and overweight. Later in life, cancer and diabetes. I mean, all these things are impacted by inadequate sleep. So get a really good sleep schedule for your child. Take the phone or device away. It should be plugged up, outside the room. Get them a different type of alarm clock that isn't their phone. Family meals. Doesn't have to be fancy. We're not talking like, 5-course on China. It can be a box of pizza on the floor with the family around it, whatever that family looks like. But scheduling meals on a regular basis without the distraction of screens, where the family comes around and talks about their day, they debrief, how are things going? Doesn't have to be anything fancy. I was just mentioning this to my 17-year-old who was trying to go and have fun. I said, nope, you're going to miss family meals, and they're so important. We get to talk about our trials and triumphs. He's like, I've never told anyone my trials and triumphs. I'm like, you don't realize that you have been telling me those all the time for 17 years. But that's what you do around the dinner table or the breakfast table or whenever the family can have the meal. Daily movement, something that you enjoy. That can be dancing, running, swimming, jumping, walking the dog, whatever it is. But the release of the endorphins and daily exercise are really important. So some healthy habits that we can put in place when we're thinking about teens who are anxious and depressed and looking for something that calms that down from the release of dopamine from nicotine. It's important to talk about some of the things that can help prevent it. It sounds like there was one more question in the back before we're close to wrapping up.
Yes.
What was your question?
Yes, there's a new market of cigar bars that have been introduced. What has been the research that's been done in regards to the effect of the damages that it's doing to youth and mature people, period?
Thank you for that question. Cigar bars, they're so trendy, and you'll see them on TV and everyone's so swaggy and cool. What's the evidence on cigars?
Don't smoke them. No, for real. I think a lot of people don't understand, what is tobacco? What is considered tobacco? That's cigars, that's hookahs, that's cigarettes, mini cigars, vapes, other e-cigarettes. It's also nicotine pouches, other lozenges, things that if you walk into a smoke shop, I promise you will be amazed at the amount of products that are in there that are tobacco. and that ranges in different milligrams. I mean, some of this stuff goes up to like 20 milligrams. So a typical cigarette has about 2 to 3 milligrams of nicotine in it. So when you really think about some of these things that have up to like 20, that's a whole pack of cigarettes almost in one thing. A lot of times other people, like with cigars, they don't realize that cigars are wrapped in tobacco paper. So not only are you using the tobacco that's in the cigar, but then what's wrapped in it is also cigar. So I don't know, there's law enforcement down there, so I don't want to out anybody. But if you're using cigar paper to wrap other things, other leaves, you're mixing in tobacco. And people don't realize that that's dangerous because now you're having 2 different things going on at the same time.
So just air?
Just air.
We're back to just air.
Yeah. Fresh air.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we are nearing the end of time. Are there any other burning questions as we're talking about tobacco? Any other questions that someone wanted to get answered before we wrap up with this wonderful panel? There's a question right here in the middle. Coming right here with the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Anne. I'm a resident here in Wake Forest, but I also work in research at Duke on adolescent risk and resilience. So one of my questions is, you've given a lot of great information about cessation programs. I'm wondering, in your experiences, both in the medical field and the community health field, what are some of the best prevention activities that you see at a community level for vaping prevention?
That's such a wonderful question. Bolu, do you want to try?
I can try to take a stab at that. I don't think there's a ton of really great prevention. I think in medicine in general, we're more reactive than we are preventative. But I think there's various groups and organizations like Truth Initiative and Tobacco Free Kids, and then really just kind of getting your schools involved, talking to the principals, not just high school, but really elementary and junior high, because that's really where we start to see the initial introduction to this. And so by the time the kids get to high school, they're already indoctrinated into tobacco. They've been maybe using it for a couple of years at that point. And so looking at those different organizations to see how they can, or how you can maybe use some of their programs and get them out in the community is probably the best.
Yeah, Bolu, that was awesome. Honestly, getting involved with your school is really where that starts, and trying to influence your PTAs, trying to influence your counselors to implement cessation programs, but implement the education in general. Because a lot of the time, students are just vaping because we think it's water vapor. We think it's safer, and we want to fit in. So if your child knows that, this is not an okay habit from the get-go at home, they're not going to come to school and do it. And even if they're kind of tempted, let me try, they have the education that this is nicotine. It's a harmful and addictive substance that I could potentially get hooked on. So really just encouraging that at-home prevention, at-home education, and open arms, like, hey, let's learn together. It's okay to ask me questions here. If I don't know it, I'll Google it on the CDC first. I'll just, or ask a health professional. Just encouraging that learning together with your child is, I think, the most important step.
Yeah, I love that. As a pediatrician, we're always asking about substances and vaping and tobacco and things like that. And I practice with teens how they're going to say no, right? Not like the old, just say no program that we had maybe growing up, 80s and 90s, whatever. But we talk about their out, right? Whether that's, whatever they're being offered, right? We talk about what their goals are, what they want their life to look like, if those things that they might be offered align with that, and then we just practice they're out. Sometimes for athletes, it's nah, man, I'm a I'm a runner, I don't need to mess up my lungs, or whatever it is, but we kind of talk about practicing that. And then I always remind my boys, like, you are who you hang around with, so like choose your friends wisely. But you're right, the education absolutely starts at home. I think we might have one more question. I'm going to go last question. Oh no, there was two. There are two last questions right here, this young gentleman, and then we'll go to the back.
I'm Cameron, and I just wanted to know if vapes blacken your lungs like cigarettes do.
Thank you, Cameron, for that question. Do vapes blacken your lungs like cigarettes do?
For you, yes. No, not really. It doesn't carry the tar like cigarettes do. But that's not to say that they're good for you, as Nnenne pointed out earlier this evening. They're not safe. There is no safe smoking. There is no safe vaping. No matter what people try to tell you, 1 cigarette a day adds up. There is no safe way to smoke except for not smoking.
Right, and whether on autopsy your lungs are black or not, if you have such damaging lung injury from vitamin E and a vape that you need a new set of lungs because they no longer work, I think that's pretty compelling to me. Last question in the very back there. Thank you.
I'm Tiandra. My question is, I work for Wake County Public Schools, and I know our admin assistant has taken like a call every day for someone calling with COVID. I'm scared to death. I haven't had COVID, but I'm one of the ones that keep up with my vaccines and my booster. The time a booster comes out, I'm right there getting it. But these are teachers calling in, and they are among our students, and they're also at central office. What can I do to continue to keep our schools safe and central office safe if they are not reporting? Because some of them have it and don't report it. And it is very selfish, number one, but I want to continue not to get it. And I'm afraid for the students in the classrooms as well. What can I do to help?
Well, first of all, congratulations for being one of the last of us to not have had gotten COVID. But Dr. Etienne, what else should she do?
Well, you've already done the most important thing. You're keeping up with your vaccinations. Another thing, of course, that you can do is make sure the best you can encourage. I know you're probably taking precautions and frequent hand washing, wearing masks when appropriate. Try to instill that in others. Unfortunately, we can't control the actions of others. We can only control our own actions. And it's important to stay up to date on your vaccines, wear a mask when appropriate, keep safe distances, frequent hand washing, and also keep yourself healthy. Eat healthy, eat a healthy diet, get regular exercise, sleep, and you've done well to not get COVID. You should go play the lottery because you're probably one of the only few people who have not had COVID. But the important thing is, you are vaccinated, and if eventually you probably will get COVID. And when you do, you will not die from COVID. I can safely say that because you're fully vaccinated. We don't see people who are fully vaccinated and healthy dying from COVID. So if you get it, more than likely, you won't have any major complications. But just, encouraging people who at the school, the staff, to, adopt those same practices. You can't control them, but just trying to reinforce that in them.
Thank you so much. And that was our last question. I just want to give a big round of applause to our panel today. You all were fantastic. I learned so much, and to our audience members with your phenomenal questions, a round of applause for you also. Before we go, I would like to introduce Officer Nick. Is Officer Nick still here? Nate. I'm sorry. Officer Nate, who's going to talk to us, we're thinking about safety, he's going to talk to us about gun locks and violence prevention.
Okay, this is not going to be as in-depth as theirs, but just to give you guys a little bit about me, I work for the Wake Forest Police Department. I've worked here since July of 2018. Prior to that, I worked almost 10 years in Wilmington, North Carolina. I've done everything from patrol to task forces, school resource officer, homicide detective, and now I'm part of our community resource unit. Over the years, of course, one of the things we see far too often, especially in youth these days, is gun violence. And you're starting to see it a lot more just through media and news and access. A lot of these school shootings are because of firearms that are not secure at home. So it's very important if you're a gun owner and you have children to make sure that you're locking these up. They're not accessible to your kids. There's multiple ways to do that. If you have a gun safe, that is the best thing. If you cannot get a gun safe, they are expensive, I know. Next best thing is a gun lock. And I'll show you what that looks like on a firearm. But really the goal is to just keep firearms out of the hands of youth and people that don't need to have them. And some people, it's not just youth. If you live with people that are maybe having some mental problems and drug addictions, a lot of things add up. Sometimes they get depressed, and that's, unfortunately, we see that far too often too, is suicides. And we would like to prevent that as much as possible. Now, you can't prevent everything, but you can try your best to keep the accessibility of those firearms specifically out of the hands of youth as much as possible. So that's my little spiel. Like I said, it's not as good as theirs. But I can and I will show what a proper gun lock looks like on your gun. We do have some gun locks here. If you do own a firearm, Ms. Betty has one right there. We will be more than happy to get you one if you are in need. The police department has just ordered more of these, so we should be getting some more. If you ever need one, come to the police department and just ask, hey, do you guys have any gun locks? We will be more than happy if we have one to provide anybody with one. Because again, our goal is safety. Any questions? All right.
I actually have a quick question. I'm not a gun owner, but, and I probably will never own a gun, but what is the best way outside of a lock? If someone really doesn't have access to a lock, they don't have access to the other things, should they store the bullets outside? What is another way that people can actually, if they just really don't have access or they're not here to listen to your great speech about gun safety?
Sure. I would just recommend, if you don't have a gun lock and you don't have a safe, do the best that you can. Make sure the firearm is unloaded. If you have a semi-automatic handgun like this, a rifle, revolver, very good point. Make sure the ammunition is out. Kids are smart, okay, and very curious. And you see it on the news, it's almost weekly within our area of anywhere ranging from a year old to teenagers getting, their hands on firearms. A 1-year-old can pull a trigger, regardless of what you think. These triggers are not, most of them have 5-pound pull, I think, on the trigger, which is not a lot. But yes, I would keep firearms and ammunition and magazines stored in different places. If you have small children that can't climb yet, I would recommend a high point, a high cabinet, things like that. But it is difficult, especially when they get older. And to that point too, if you do own a firearm, I would always recommend teaching your children about safety of the firearm, actually showing them how to handle and properly use one with your supervision. Okay, that is a important part. I have found with children that have grown up around, let's say, parents that hunt. Okay, they're going to go hunt with their parents from a young age on, and typically they have much more respect for that firearm than a kid that just finds one that has no idea what it's all about. Okay, so educating your kids about that is an important thing. And I'll just point out too, if you don't want to educate yourself on owning a firearm, do not put it in your house. Okay? Because if you're not educated on it, how are you going to teach your kids? So that is also a good thing. Another point. Please, 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 if you want to own a firearm, by all means, it is your right. But please educate yourself on it and know how to handle it properly and safely.
Such an important conversation. Thank you so much, Officer Nate, for sharing that with us. And then we have Miss Betty here who's got gun locks. Please do take a free gun lock. And know that you can go, sounds like, to your local police department, at least here in Wake Forest, and ask for gun locks. So there's often free gun lock programs.
Yes. So most agencies will, I think it's a nonprofit. They'll actually send us gun locks for free. So typically, most agencies, I'm not going to say all the time, most agencies should have some on hand. We will have more in a few weeks. We unfortunately have run low. That's also a good thing. We run low. People are getting them. But we will have more, and it doesn't hurt to just stop by wherever you live, whatever municipality, county. Stop by and ask if they have gun locks that they could get to.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to our panelists and our audience for this wonderful discussion. And that concludes Clearing the Air, our town hall tonight. Thanks, everyone, so much.